On the morning of December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor looked peaceful. The water was calm, the tropical wind gentle, and across the harbor, the great battleships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet sat quietly at their moorings. Sailors were waking up, eating breakfast, sweeping decks, writing letters home. It was a Sunday like any other, but far beyond the horizon something was coming, something no one in Hawaii was prepared for. Across thousands of miles of ocean, a secret Japanese strike force was closing in. 6 aircraft carriers, 24 support ships, and more than 400 aircraft, all moving in a formation so silent that the Pacific itself seemed to conceal them. No radio, no signals, no chatter. Only wind, waves, and a single mission: cripple the United States before the United States could fight. Japan had not chosen this path out of hatred. They chose it because they believed they had no other choice. With American oil embargoes cutting off the fuel supply to Tokyo, Japan faced the slow suffocation of its military. Without oil, their empire would collapse. With oil, they had a chance if they struck first. So they aimed at the heart of American power in the Pacific, Pearl Harbor. On the night before the attack, Japanese pilots stood quietly on the decks of their carriers, staring into a moonlit horizon. Many wrote final letters. Some prayed. Some stood expressionless, aware that dawn might be the last sunrise they would ever see. By 6:00 a.m. on December 7th, the carriers were in position. Aircraft were rolled out onto the decks. Engines roared to life. The smell of fuel mixed with cold ocean air. Pilots climbed into cockpits, preparing for a mission they had been training for over months. At 6:20 a.m., the command was given. The first wave lifted off: bombers, dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters. A full symphony of war aimed at an enemy who still slept. Meanwhile, on Oahu, the day began like any other. At a radar station on Opana Hill, 2 young American operators noticed a massive cluster of aircraft approaching the island. They reported it, but the officer on duty assumed it was a flight of B-17 bombers arriving from the mainland. A critical warning, dismissed as a false alarm. At 7:48 a.m., the sky over northern Oahu darkened with the shapes of war. Japanese Air Commander Mitsuo Fuchida looked down at the harbor below. Battleships lined up in perfect rows, aircraft parked neatly on runways, everything calm, everything vulnerable. He grabbed his radio and shouted the message that would echo across history. Tora! 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 The attack had achieved complete surprise. And then, the world exploded. The first bombs screamed down from the sky, hitting Ford Island with violent force. Torpedoes skimmed across the water, leaving white trails before slamming into the hulls of American ships. Steel twisted. Fire burst upward. The sound of explosions rolled across the harbor like thunder. USS Oklahoma took multiple torpedoes in quick succession. The ship shuddered, began listing sharply, and within minutes rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of sailors inside its hull. USS West Virginia was hit again and again, taking on water faster than the crew could respond. And then came the tragedy of USS Arizona. A Japanese armor-piercing bomb plunged through the deck and detonated in the forward magazine. The resulting explosion tore the battleship apart, sending a fireball into the sky that could be seen miles away. In less than 9 minutes, Arizona sank, taking 177 men with her. At the airfields, disaster unfolded just as quickly. At Hickam, Wheeler, and Ford Island, American aircraft sat tightly clustered to prevent sabotage, ironically becoming perfect targets for aerial bombing. Explosions ripped through hangars. Fuel ignited. Pilots ran toward planes as shrapnel and machine gun fire cut across the runways. Yet even in the chaos, acts of courage emerged. 2 young pilots, George Welch and Kenneth Taylor, raced to a remote airstrip, took off under fire, and fought back despite being outnumbered and outgunned. Their P-40s dove into the enemy formations again and again, scoring multiple kills. On the water, sailors jumped into oil-slick flames to rescue their shipmates. Some made repeated trips into burning compartments to pull others out. Others manned anti-aircraft guns barefoot, shirtless, firing until the barrels glowed red. For nearly 50 minutes, the first wave hammered Pearl Harbor. The sky filled with black smoke. Battleships burned. The air tasted of metal and fuel. Men on the ground fought to survive minute by minute. Then came the second wave. Around 8:50 a.m., another wave of Japanese aircraft descended upon the already devastated base. This time, American defenses were awake. Anti-aircraft guns roared back, filling the air with bursts of flak. Several Japanese planes were shot down, spiraling into the harbor as burning wrecks. But the damage was already overwhelming. By the time the attack ended 2 hours after it began, America had suffered. Over 2,400 killed, nearly 1,200 wounded, 8 battleships damaged or sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, and a fleet wreathed in smoke and fire. Yet within the devastation lay a truth Japan had not anticipated. The U.S. aircraft carriers, America's real strike power, were not in the harbor. The fuel depots were untouched. The repair facilities still stood. Japan had won a tactical victory, but sown the seeds of strategic defeat. Across the United States, radio broadcasts carried the news. Shock turned to anger. Confusion turned to unity. A nation that had been divided about entering the war now stood fiercely aligned. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress with words that would become immortal. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. In just 33 minutes, Congress declared war. Pearl Harbor did not break America. It awakened America. It set into motion the campaigns of Midway, Guadalcanal, the island-hopping operations, and the eventual drive toward victory in World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a moment of destruction. It was the spark that transformed the United States into a superpower, a reminder that a nation can be struck hard, but if its resolve holds, it cannot be defeated. A quiet Sunday morning changed the world, and from the ashes of Pearl Harbor, a new chapter of history began, one that would reshape the entire century.